Great, and welcome. My
Hello.
name is Cam Lassiter. Welcome to Quantified Software. With me today is Aashni Shah. She's worked as a software developer both on internal tooling, analytics at very large companies, smaller companies, at nonprofits, a real wealth of experience in internationalization and other software projects. So Aashni, welcome, and do you want to give us a little bit of a pitch on what you're working on now and what your current projects are?
Hey, yeah, super excited to be here, Cam. Thanks for inviting me. In terms of what I'm working on now, there's a project I'm working on called Talanga, which is focused on privacy and specifically trying to give individuals and families a better way to secure their personal documents in an encrypted backup system and sharing them in a, well, more secure way. And I also have a couple of other projects going on. I run Elixir Labs, which is a nonprofit. We partner with other nonprofits around the world and try to build technical solutions to make them effectively work better. So better in terms of using fewer resources for the same things, especially in the technical scope. I've been running virtual quiz night events for the last few months to try and raise money for folks in Kenya that have been really impacted by the whole COVID situation. I'm helping all of my family businesses. I like to keep busy is kind of how I look at it. And I'm actually, just before I hopped onto this call with you, I'm in the last tail end stage of trying to launch this other project that I've decided to hack on this weekend, which is called Hype Docs, as a sort of way to hype yourself about all the things you've achieved.
Which is awesome. And we should also mention that you're in a location that has maybe some unstable internet and power. So hopefully that won't hit us during the interview.
Yes.
But
It is one of the best places to live, but from an internet connectivity perspective, you need to have a lot of patience here.
yeah, absolutely. So to anchor us a little bit on your experiences, I give you kind of a quick intro to your software building experience. Could you give us a little bit more precise about kind of team sizes and what you see in different stages of the software product lifecycle?
Yeah. So I'll talk about some of the bigger companies I've worked at, which is specifically Amazon and Microsoft. Amazon has this sort of policy of you want to be able to feed your entire team with two pizzas. It's the two pizza philosophy. And that's usually around 8 people on a team. While I
I
was
was
there,
gonna
that was
say
about
I can eat a lot of pizza, so
yeah, I could eat half a pizza all on my own. So I don't know where they got these estimates from. So there's that was kind of Amazon's policy. With Microsoft, I was on a really interesting team setup. I was part of the Azure team, and half of our engineers were in, so that was about 4 or 5 people, were in Dublin, which is where the team originally started. A couple of folks, like the more management senior folks on our team, were in Redmond. And then there was myself and 3 other new hires who just joined the company, fresh out of university, who joined in Vancouver. And so that was probably one of the more broken up teams. And if we get to it at some other point, I'd love to talk about why I don't think that was one of the best setups in terms of a team. More recently, I've been working at Square and Hypercare. So Hypercare was a startup just getting off the ground and still figuring out what team structures look like. It was more just you've got 5 engineers and you do what you can with them. With Square, I think I was the 20-something employee working on the Cash App out of the Kitchener-Waterloo office. And in under 2 years, they grew to over 70 people in that office alone. I think globally, they grew like crazy. And I was on a few different teams at Square on Cash App where we had, trying to think back, I think on the international team, we were about 4 to 5 engineers and a product manager and a designer. And those engineers were split across myself, who was doing a lot more of the front end web development and some of the back ends. And then there was an Android engineer, an iOS engineer, and then 2 back-end engineers. What I found at Square was, depending on the scope of the project you were working on, you usually, or like they tried to set it up where if your team had customer facing changes, you would have an Android engineer and a iOS engineer on your team, as well as a designer. And then for all of the back end stuff, you'd have 1 to X, depending on, again, the scope and the size of the work you were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in those, that's great. Like some different flavors of experience, and the remote world we're in right now. That's
Yeah.
a interesting experience there. In those different experiences and in the hypergrowth and the more stable, how have you seen teams select what to build, the priority function of what to pull off the backlog?
Yeah. I think at Square, I think Square is probably one of the best experiences I can talk about from this because it's probably the point where I was most aware, whereas the other ones I was still sort of, I don't know what I'm doing here.
Just tell me
And
the
so
next thing and I'll go do it.
just just give it to me. I think Square, some of the things they did really great is they had these different team functions. So I was originally on the internationalization team, and then I eventually got moved to the customer success team around building better customer. Like if you have an issue, building out that entire flow for you. And some of the prioritization tools we did there were working with specifically with a PM. So each team had a PM associated with it. And one really good thing is all of those PMs talked with each other. And so they had a good feel for what's happening on other teams. And we would try to identify both with the product manager as well as the engineers on the team. It was and designer. It was a very collaborative process around identifying, okay, what pain points are our users facing right now, if it's an existing feature? How can we make this better? And then asking that question of, is it a quick 2 to 10 line change or, a couple of days worth of work, which will make the customer experience significantly better or even just a little bit better? If that's the case, let's throw it into our sprint. If it's a lot more work than that, then we need to take a bit more time prioritizing it and seeing does it fit within the scope or the goal of what we're trying to achieve within this quarter or this this like 2-month 3-month sprint, whatever that looks like. Mm-hmm. And I think that worked well because yes, there are always going to be big features, especially as you start growing and you start amassing millions of customers. There are plenty of features you want to include into it, and you really need to zone in and focus on the things that will push your product forward, will give your customers the best experience, but will also make engineers happy. And I know one of the other questions you wanted to dive into at some point were tech debt. And so I think that whole tech debt conversation is really important as well.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is it sounds like there was almost an organic process, that it was very collaborative, internal to the team as a unit, that with your product manager and the other engineers and the designer kind of collaborating and saying, oh, we think this is an easier opportunity. Let's get that in. Let's prioritize that. Maybe almost like a weighted shortest job first of like, oh, since it's small and we get a win, let's go and tackle that versus something that's a longer term investment. When you found those items that had that trade-off, so kind of at the front end of the tech debt conversation of, hey, we could do X and it would get us the value Y, but in doing it in this way, we know we're going to accept some uncomfortable aspects of it or not as interesting aspects of it that we're going to have to pay off later.
Or it's going to make Z much harder down the line.
Yeah, exactly. That's the classic trade-off, right? So what was the languaging that was used around that? How did you see it work well or not well, or did it always feel awkward? What was that conversation like?
So I think one of the things that I really appreciated about the folks that we worked with is they were always trying to make improvements and be hyper aware of not just the PM and the customer's experiences, but also the engineers' experiences and by extension designers as well. Because I found while that was probably one of the most productive companies I ever worked at, but I never felt pressured to stay past 6 o'clock. And I never really felt like, even before major launches, we were all in pretty good spirits. Yes, I did stay a couple of late nights, and that's just purely because I wanted to and not because there was a pressure system there. Within Square and the Cash App, we did actually have a team of engineers that were specifically focused on making the developer life better. And one of the big pain points we hit, especially as you start growing and scaling, is how do we avoid throughput issues? And how do we avoid, hitting limits on our databases and our database queries? And how do we ensure that at our peak time every week, we're not falling over because our servers can't handle it? And so we had a phenomenal team that was specifically working and focusing on that, where I actually never once had to think about that, which is phenomenal and really great because that's the part of computing, because that's a word, that I like to avoid. And
So much there. I want to just pause you for a second and just make sure that I can extract all the value out of what you were just talking about. So
yeah,
that internal team that was focused on developer joy. I don't think that was your word, but
I like
I
it.
can put those words in your mouth. What was sort of the ratio of the number of engineers that were working on that internal joy factor
Yeah.
to
So I
the
think it
rest of the?
originally, yeah, yeah. I think it originally sort of started more as like one or two individuals felt this really big pain point. And, I worked with Jesse, and Jesse is just honestly such a wonderful person. He's got this sort of vision, understanding of, okay, we can kind of bury this pain for a little bit, but we know it's going to be a bigger issue. And so would work with that person, or he would be the person to start pushing out, okay, maybe it's time that we think about restructuring how our services work. Maybe we need to move away from our monolith and create a new microservice system, which they have actually been building. And it was a lot of fun to work on while I was there. And so that team would sort of start off as like one or two engineers who felt this really big pain point, and they could see it's getting worse. And they were one of the teams, or they were usually from a team that was more back-end focused and less customer facing. And so their work would sort of start pushing and evolving into more of that. And as their project they're working on ramped up, if they needed support, a team would start forming around them. What I found is the teams towards the end of my time that I was there they were two different teams working on two different sections of improving engineer joy, as you called it. And they were both about 5 to 6 engineers each. Each engineer kind of had their own project that they owned. If it came to crunch time and someone needed support, you kind of drop what you're working on and shift over to theirs, because you're in launch phase or launch mode. And so I think that was a really sort of productive way of doing it, where it was never hey, we think that this is 100% the direction we need to go to, because if you start doing that as an engineer, you're probably not going to end up in the right direction. But rather, you felt that pain point. You've become your best customer now because you know what you need, and you can start building the right solution for it, and continuously testing and pushing back and pushing it up the chain to the other developers and engineers on the team who are working on the same products to make sure that it works for them and their use cases.
In that process of releasing it and getting feedback and doing it yourself and feeling the pain and trying to work on the sharp edges, did you see a process around measuring or like quantification of that software in its either applicability to the use case or its quality, or was it just sort of you release it, you give it to the other engineers, you play with it, oh, that doesn't feel right, it's difficult, or it could be easier, and kind of more of a gut organic development?
Yeah, I think I can't talk to what those numbers are, partly because I don't remember, and partly because I'm not sure I'm allowed to talk about all of them.
Okay, yeah.
But I can give you a sort of a high overview of like one of the issues we were facing is at peak times. We had so many more requests that our servers literally couldn't handle it. And, there was a certain period of time where in that period of time, our customer base is almost doubled. And so that peak time, or the impact of that peak time, is like average time is now operating at that peak time, which means our service can't handle it at all. And so some of the refactoring work, or some of the provisioning or migrating data into sharded database structures and things like that, a big question there was, were we able to support our load at that peak time? Or did that result in other issues? Or was it, you have to ask that question of like, is this change going to be 1% effective, where it's only really going to reduce our peak load from 100,000 issues to 999,000 issues instead? Did I do the math right there? 99,000 issues instead. Math is hard.
The units I'm hearing are throughput, so like transactions per second, or some but I'm guessing that there was also some a latency. So were those the key metrics that kind of the software engineering organization understood as like, this is the critical business value that we're delivering, and we need to be able to achieve that? And then I'm also hearing something about an error rate. So was that also a metric that was applied to that larger one? How did those kind of interact?
Yeah, so I think each team had their own metrics that they were tracking. And
Okay.
I think that was really important, because my function, or my role within my team, wasn't really to do with the throughput part. That was another team's focus.
Yeah.
Granted, that doesn't mean I'm making ridiculous queries every single time I'm trying to access data.
Yeah.
So for my team, or for one of the projects I worked on, it was specifically how many times did a customer have to make a query on the cash help portal before finding an article to help them, or did they eventually end up creating a support ticket, because we were trying to reduce the number of support queries that were coming in because it was too many. And for those other lower level engineering teams, one of the teams was definitely focused on throughput and query times, error rates. The other team was the other team was more focused on accessibility and scalability. Sorry, not accessibility, but scalability in general. When you talk about error rates, I think one of the things that we were getting better at doing there is, as we split all of our products into different microservices, we were able to then split up owners of where different errors belong to, or which team different errors belong to. And then that actually started trickling into the prioritization decision-making process of, hey, while we want to work on feature X, Y, and Z, we're noticing that this specific error rate is happening, 1,000 times a minute, or it's only happening 2 times a minute. So if it's happening 1,000 times a minute, that's potentially a real issue. What can we do to go and fix it? Or what can we do to go and reduce that as a problem? And that also fed very much into our paging system, where if you're on call, you don't get continuously pinged on a specific issue. Are you still there?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Sorry,
I was just laughing or like kind of smiling because when you're on pager duty and the error rate starts to hit the threshold and you just start getting bombarded, it's an encouragement to make sure that the system is more robust to that type of load and behavior.
Yeah, I was fortunately not on a team that got hammered by a really bad pager. Both of the other teams that I was on kind of skidded past the team past the pager that kind of scared the crap out of a lot of people, for lack of a better descriptor. But I did talk to a lot of folks who were on that team, and I know there was a huge push to, some of these scalability projects that I mentioned, and converting our monolith server into microservices were specifically focused on, hey, these are the common issues that we're consistently seeing. There's the peak time issue where our servers just keel over and die, which is not a great experience. One of the features that evolved out of that is, how do we create an offline experience where you can still pay your transactions, and when the servers are back online, you can try them again, and you as a customer don't have to do it again. But that's not a long-term solution, because eventually all time will be peak time and no one can ever get through. Some of the other things that I think kind of evolved from these pagers, essentially, and there's a direct correlation between errors and pagers, because that's how your pagers get spun or get called. The rotation, I believe, for the team that I'm thinking of was 1 week shadow, 1 week primary, or 1 week secondary, 1 week primary, sorry. And when you're handing off to the next person, there's a meeting for a bunch of shareholders who are invested in making that experience better. And when I first joined, it was bad, but it was manageable. In terms of, it was bad because we kept keeling over and dying at peak times, but it was manageable because that was sort of the core issue. But as our team started growing, and as you saw that scale happen in a much bigger, much more real way, a whole bunch of other issues started filtering into it as well. And then it became, in my opinion, a little more scary than I personally wanted to deal with. And I think again, I was never part of the team dealing with it, so I can't comment too much more than what I'm about to say. But I think it definitely did reach a point where those issues got escalated enough, or like Square was trying to preserve the lifestyle balance. They didn't want engineers working crazy overtime where you're up all night dealing with pager issues and then coming in the next day and continuing to work, because that's not maintainable or sustainable. And it's also a really bad retention tactic. And at some point, like, a lot of conversations were getting pushed around, how do we resolve this? And that's where some of the scalability teams did organically start forming from as well.
And so I'm intrigued for this metric you talked about on the team you were on, as far as the number of help queries that came into the help
Cases
section
being
of the
created.
website, and then how many of those led, so almost like a funnel, how many of those led to support tickets getting open? Was this something that the team was tasked with, or was this something that the team kind of organically came to take on as their kind of guiding metric of, were
Yeah.
they achieving their goal?
So I joined the team after the project idea had started,
Okay.
because I was on the international team launching UK at the time. But it sort of spun out of this concept that previously, if you wanted support, you could only get it if you were logged into your account. And the issue there is, if your problem is you can't log in, how do you find out how to get help? Exactly. So the only way to do that is to create a support ticket. And I think the only way to create support tickets at that time was you also had to be logged in. I could be wrong. I think to do it through the app, you had to be logged in. But you could also reach out via Twitter as well, maybe Instagram, because those accounts were crazy active. And so one of the things that we were trying to do, because as you start having, millions of customers, you start getting, a fair percentage of those sending in questions of, where is my payment, or what happened to this transaction. A lot of them are legitimate issues. A lot of them are, you just sort of, you need to wait 20 minutes and the issue will resolve itself. And so unless we wanted to invest in hiring, hundreds or thousands of customer support workers to field every single phone call or email that was coming in, we had to find a better solution. And one of the quick solutions for that was actually building an external help portal. So if you go to cash.app/help, that's sort of an FAQ style. Here are some of the common questions that people have. And how do we get that to, how do we figure out what questions you have and put them on there so that you don't have to message us about it? And that's anywhere from, how do you add your debit card to your account? How do you withdraw funds? How do you send cash? As we started launching new features like Bitcoin and buying stocks, how do you do those steps as well? And very recently, I'll just add this one part. Very recently, with all of the COVID stuff that's happening, they actually created a section for dealing with COVID, in terms of, I think the US government was giving you the $2,000 or the $1,600, whatever it was, stimulus check. And Cash App or Square actually managed to get that to funnel straight into your bank account through there to get the money into customers' hands much faster. And so they had articles set up for that too.
I think this is a fascinating example. So let me dig in a little bit more here, because this is a place where it seems that you could invest in software and building out a better search, maybe, or you could build out better discovery. You could invest in design and layout of, are the questions easy to understand, or the search results easy to understand? You could invest in technical writing, right? The attribution or the area to pick of how to think through reducing the number of queries that come in, right? The number of support tickets that come in can be attacked in multiple different ways, or can be addressed in multiple different ways. How did you, as a member of that team, think through, of all the possible different routes to go? Was there some decision criteria you guys used to decide between the different options, or how did you think through the different paths towards achieving your goal?
Yeah, so I think some of the earlier decisions that were made were specifically focusing on, how do we get this information into a public, easy to use format? And so that was our sort of quick response to that was, okay, we have a website. Let's just build up functionality onto that website, basically create a really simple CMS type system where we can control what that data looks like, and then push it out or funnel it out to our customers, and then start tracking those metrics. And it was pretty amazing to see there was a dip in case numbers being created, and so a huge increase in the number of users that were using the search queries, because we did actually have metrics on the search, like to see how many times different queries were being made. One of the projects I tried to kickstart was actually tracking what are the highest queries that are coming through. And let's say it was something like, how do I add a second card to my account, for example. If we notice that that is happening X number of queries, then, or it's the most popular query and it's something that we could potentially easily implement a fix for, going back to that, is it a 2-day solution or is it a 2-month solution? Then it's a perfect little thing for you to work on while you're waiting for code to compile or whatever it is. So I think that's one of the things that was made. Looking back, I don't know if I would have actually recommended creating or approaching the solution the way we did it, where I actually spent a lot of my time building out a custom CMS portal to work in this area. And when it comes to CMS type systems, you really need to figure out how editing works. How does editing for multiple people work? Can you store the changes? Can you backtrack or undo? And there are a lot of additional sort of implementation features like that aren't well thought out. And so unfortunately at the time I didn't know better. And this is all about learning, right? It's learning for everyone. What I would have potentially pushed instead, based on my experiences today and on some of the other work I've done today, is potentially using a tool like Gatsby, where you create the files in Markdown and they're super quick and easy to edit. And you don't actually have to spend all this time invested into building out the entire CMS component to it. There's just like other easier ways of doing it, or using one that already exists. But I think one of the exciting things about the way we built it is it actually let us solve this other really weird problem that happened in a really unique way. And I don't think I've ever heard of this problem happen at any other company. So one of the problems that we were facing is we are now officially an international product. And while folks in the United Kingdom speak English, it's technically a slightly different British to what English, sorry, to what folks in America speak. So there is that sort of international component that you need to keep track of. So that was actually one of the really big projects I was working on towards the end of my time there. And I just wish I managed to push out a full solution. That isn't, however, the thing I was alluding to. What I was alluding to was the way the Cash App website was formed and created is it effectively was born out of Square's website. And when I say it was born out of Square's website, I mean it was originally, I think, a subdomain on there. So it was like cashapp.squareup.com or something like that. And over the years, it's been modified. And so a lot of the resources for Cash App actually still live within the Square ecosystem. If you wanted to go and look up the terms of service documents or any of the pre-existing FAQ style articles, which weren't part of the new hub that I created, they all exist within Square in some capacity. And where that was causing a really interesting set of problems is most of our customers don't actually know that Cash App is part of Square. And when you're Googling for help, which is one of the big projects that we wanted the help portal or the help center thing to be, is make it really search engine friendly. So if you go and Google Cash App refund, for example, it'll actually get you to the refund article, not just the help portal. One of the interesting side effects we found as a result of that is there were a ton of scammers who managed to get their keywords and their metadata to be stronger than ours and were actually above us in search results. And it's because Google couldn't figure out who to prioritize between Cash App and Square, because both of them had really relevant content and there was no way to attribute the two or share or sort of say, hey, anything for Square, push it over to Cash App, prioritize Cash App. And around the same time, there was another really interesting problem where I think Google allowed pretty much anyone to create ads, and I think they still do. And so folks were actually creating ads for Cash App or Square payments and things like that. And so not only do you have a ton of these scam articles that are showing up before our actual results, you also had ads showing up as well, which you can't beat ads. So we ran a quick experiment where we paid a couple of bucks and we saw 20% of users who did a search result and came across our fake website that we were advertising. clicked on it. Now, 20% is a huge number. We don't know I mean, I'm not allowed to talk about the actual numbers of like how many people actually funnel down to that, but 20% of that is still significant enough that you want to solve that problem. So there was one conversation that started happening with folks at Google around, hey, this is kind of an issue and we need to address this, but we can't do anything about it. And I wasn't part of that team, so I won't talk more about it without angering the Google gods or the YouTube gods. But there was also specifically dealing with the Square Cash App confusion and how do you go about addressing that. And so what happened with my project is I had to really, really focus on making sure our search engine optimization was top notch. So I somehow became a search engine expert in this process, which is not what I expected to do. And then the other interesting things is we actually had to, or I pushed a bunch of projects to migrate all of the content we had that's still Cash App specific and push it all onto our website in some capacity. And so when you asked about that prioritization piece before, these all started as different hypotheses of, hey, I think if we add a contact page, it'll make our contact information show up before anyone else's. If we go into X, Y, or Z, this is a hypothesis and this is my result from it. And so I positioned it that way and we went for the least amount of work and easiest to test first. So I did that, we pushed those out. We saw the effects were starting to take place, but it wasn't sufficient enough. And then I started pushing out the full force. How do we migrate all of the data? And in this case, it was specifically legal, like our terms and conditions type documents. So how do we push that off Square servers and pull it onto Cash App so that it lives on the Cash App domain? And the extra fun part is how do we retain all of the good SEO credits that Square has been capturing over the years so that we can directly push it onto these new pages that have no other connections.
Mm-hmm. And so is this where the custom CMS and the unique solution came in? Is that the...
Yeah. So what I ended up doing is creating a sort of wrapping what I originally had into different data types or like document types that you could effectively use. So there was the help article document type, then there was the legal article document type. And I think as I was leaving, they were starting to talk about a third kind for the, what's it called? The Cash App, it's the reward boost program, where they can start showing boost information about all the different deals they have going on. And so that would have just turned into a third document type that lives within that context as well.
Interesting. So as you talked about the learning of, now that you know what what you didn't when you started, maybe you wouldn't have implemented a custom CMS. Are there other examples of, as you look forward onto your next projects or companies, either certain practices that you're certain that you want to continue, or that there's different practices that you'd want to change or try something different?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I talk so fondly about my time at Square is because I really loved the way that our team structures were there. I thought it was really conducive for learning. There was a lot of mentorship. And for me, as a younger version of myself, I'm all about learning. Even today, I'm all about learning. And it was a dual learning mechanism where I was also teaching whoever was teaching me. And there was a lot of encouragement for pair programming. And so that's something that I hope to retain in the future, both with the nonprofit I'm doing as well as my other ventures like Talanga. And so that's definitely one area that I think is really exciting and really important, is just the learning aspect. In terms of team structures, one of the things I've been really focusing on for Elixir Labs, which is the nonprofit I've been running, is making sure that our team structure has product manager, a designer, and then whatever developer or engineer skills are needed, because you don't need a front-end web engineer if it's a mobile project. And just really focusing on, okay, what exactly does this project need? Great, let's go and hire is probably a terrible word in this instance, but recruit, because we're all volunteers. How do we go and recruit a volunteer who has this skill set so we can bring them on board and start pushing forward with creating, whether it's a website or it's an app or whatever it is that we're doing for the nonprofit we're working with. And I think keeping that general structure of that collaboration aspect where you've got product managers who all communicate with each other and have a good idea of the effective direction that they're going in. But that's also there's that really good feedback loop between the engineers, the designers, and the product managers, because I think if everyone has the ability to share their opinions, you will have a much better product, first off. And I also feel like that's a great way to make people feel like owners of what they're working on as well. Because it's not just, oh, I was told to do X. It's like, hey, we discussed X. I'm in it. I'm here for it. I want to build it now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
In that context, I'm also intrigued by, as much I'm motivated by learning. This whole project is about learning, so that definitely touches me as well. When you are in a situation where you have more junior or newer developers coming in, engineers, and they want to learn, and maybe they have a particular framework they want to learn, and they're trying to bring that framework in, but then maybe you as a more experienced engineer say like, I'm not sure this really fits in the project. How do you think through kind of like walking that line of, yes, that might be fun to to learn, and that might be the new shiny thing, but let's go with what we've got. How have you thought through the trade-off there?
Yeah. The hype docs thing I'm working on right now is pure HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And as I write it right now, I'm cringing at all of the changes and all the hatred I'm going to have for past me in the future because I need to go and update it. And I think the reason I share that is because I think the reason that new technology is being created is because it serves specific purposes. And you need to create an environment where new folks, whether it's a brand new, fresh out of university or fresh out of college engineer joining your team, or it's someone who actually just pivoted their career and is joining your team later on in their lives, they're learning some of the new technologies that you as an engineer who's been working in this role might not be aware of or might not have had experience of or understood the benefits of. And I'm one of those people that if I have a flow that works for me, and 4 years ago that was using AngularJS, the first version, I could build up websites really quickly, and that doesn't mean that's the right way to do it. And sure, it'll work, but if you're open to change, then it could mean a much better, much faster way of working, which ultimately is better for your team. That being said, there are many situations where, as a senior engineer, you know why product X or tool Y isn't going to work well in your space. And so I think that's a really great learning opportunity or teaching opportunity where, as a more senior engineer, you can say, you know what, let's pair on this. Let's see how far we can get it to go in or to serve this project problem we're working on. And maybe it's a couple of hours on a single afternoon. The two of you can pair on it, and if that's getting your endpoints hooked up, if that's building your help center to pick up the data and the stories and things like that, then great, go for it. And as a senior engineer, if you know where the problems are, you can actually direct the work you're doing to head in that direction. And that way the junior engineer is able to understand, not because they were told, but rather because they experienced why those pain points are there and why the solution doesn't work in that case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, this has been a really great conversation. I feel like we've had a really wide-ranging discussion. Is there anything else, any other learnings around software or anything else you want to add you feel like we didn't touch on or is critical to the software development process?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this before, but pair programming is great. And I think one of the things I've been trying to do a lot more of today is actually focusing on sharing what I learn. And so that comes in various formats of I speak at a ton of events, or pre-COVID, I spoke at more in-person events, obviously. Post or during COVID, it's a little up in the air. So that's one area. But if you're not comfortable public speaking, which a lot of folks aren't, there's also the opportunity to write blog posts or newsletters, which are also things that I'm currently doing. Sharing via Twitter, offering to just pair with someone and work on a product or project with them. Joining open source communities are also another really great way of learning and sharing what you've learned. And I think one of the best things that I found by sharing what I'm learning is I've actually gotten a lot of feedback on, hey, I saw you write about X. Have you thought about using Y as well? Or have you thought about trying Y instead? And it opens up a lot of really great, interesting conversations. So, highly recommend that as like alternate ways of both learning and sharing what you've learned.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Ashni, this has been really fun for me, and it's great to hear more experiences of software development. And any last spots you want to leave us with of where we can see your writing, see your sharings, follow the projects you're doing?
Yeah, you can find my blog and my newsletter on my website, which is ashni.me. I'll send the link to Cam so you can paste it in the video description right below. And also, you should subscribe. And so I try to send a newsletter out once a week, usually Monday mornings. Sometimes I fall asleep and it'll be later in the week. And then I also try to share blog posts. And what I'm trying to do right now is my newsletter is a little more focused on the startup journey that I'm going through, while my blog posts are generally more focused on technical blocks that I hit. And I think one of the really exciting things about blog posts is as I'm coding or developing whatever it is I'm working on, whether it's Hype Docs, whether it's one of the nonprofit projects or Talonga, if I have to Google something and spend more than 20 or 30 minutes trying to figure it out, and I didn't find an easy to read article on it, and it wasn't because I had a typo or forgot a semicolon somewhere, then I'll put it down and keep track of it. And ideally, at some point, write a blog post on why I think this is a good solution, or what the problem is, how I ran into it, and what solutions I've come across or which solutions I implemented.
That's a great tip to leave us with as far as idea generation for what to write about and what to share. So thank you again. This has been Quantified Software.